This influencer was sentenced to over 2 years in federal prison after investigators discovered that his entire luxury lifestyle was built on stolen government relief funds. Remember the PPP fraudsters from back in the pandemic? Well, apparently they're still out getting got. Because who would have thought stealing from the government would not lead to some serious criminal charges? But what makes all this so much worse is when he finally was arrested, his legal defense involved declaring himself a divine being, demanding a $10 billion bond, and insisting that the United States court system had no power over his flesh and blood. What the? So meet Scott Lee Huss, a 28-year-old content creator who built a massive online presence with more than 3 million followers under the name of J.R. Yako. His entire brand was, about wealth, travel, and that whole alpha male Chad lifestyle that you see. His bio described himself as building legacies through art, music, fashion, and luxury. And his feed was essentially packed with the usual stuff. The blue water, the supercars, and, everything fancy. Now, if you spend any time on social media, you would know there's a lot of these guys. And if you've spent any time on my channel, you would also know a lot of those guys don't have the money they claim they have. Because apparently, it's easier to get rich if you pretend you're rich and sell courses on how you got rich, when in reality, you're getting rich off of selling courses, or even worse, committing fraud to keep up that whole bit that you're actually rich. So, to his followers, he probably looked like just another success story. Someone who figured out the game and was living proof that if you have enough hustle, it'll pay off. But according to federal prosecutors, a lot of that success was just smoke and mirrors built off of other people's money. So as everyone knows, back in 2020, the government came to a complete halt because of the pandemic, and there they made a whole bunch of programs that enabled business owners and normal people to get some sort of relief. The most notable one for business owners was the PPP, which is Paycheck Protection Program, and Economic Injury Disaster Loans, which is the EIDL. Essentially, this is emergency funding that was meant for small businesses to cover them during the time where the shutdown was, because, just because the government shut everything down doesn't mean that your mortgage payments stop. But of course, with every good gesture, someone's going to try to exploit it. So, as we've seen time and time again here on this channel even, a whole lot of people extracted a whole bunch of money from both the PPP and the other program for their own personal gain. And they spent it on Lambos, Ferraris, and everything that you can flex on Instagram with. But in this case, according to the indictment, between July 2020 and March of 2021, he submitted applications through 4 different Florida-based companies: LeadCom LLC, Apex Marketing Inc., Supremo Sociedad Anima LLC, and Temple of the Tao Inc. What kind of Temple of the Tao? What kind of name is that? And prosecutors allege that these applications contained false information about employee counts and annual revenues, basically inflating the numbers to qualify for bigger loans. In total, across the 6 separate loans he took out, he walked away with over $600,000. Now, of course, these programs had pretty clear rules about what you could spend the money on: employee salaries, rent, utilities, business expenses. What you couldn't spend it on was cryptocurrency, Lambos, and flexing on Instagram. That's a big no-no. And while the loan fraud by itself would be enough to put him away, it didn't end there. Because by 2023, he apparently had financing on both his Lamborghini and a Mercedes-Benz. However, instead of making payments like everyone else, he allegedly tried a much different approach. Scott decided to mail some fictitious payment vouchers to car finance companies, which are essentially fake checks designed to look like real payments. One was for $120,000 and the other one was for $190,000. That's over $300,000 in bogus paper sent to try to wipe clear his loans. What was he trying to do with this? Like, at what point do you sit down and print out fake checks for over $300,000 and expect, yeah, this is gonna work? Like, what was the plan here? Obviously, that was gonna decline. But even though all of this landed in federal court, Scott had already made headlines for a completely different case. This was related to a traffic stop. Because in March of 2024, Scott was riding as a passenger while his girlfriend, Cecilia Selena Mercado, a singer who goes by Cece, she got pulled over in Sunny Isles Beach for ignoring a right turn only sign. And this was supposed to be a standard traffic stop, nothing more, but instead, what followed was quite the event, because when officers asked her for a license, Ceci, she handed them a passport instead. I don't know why I called her Cece earlier, because looking at that spelling, yeah, that's definitely Ceci, but she handed her a passport instead. And when the officers asked her to step out of the vehicle, she refused. And then meanwhile, the whole time, Scott was sitting there in the passenger seat, filming the officers, claiming they have no jurisdiction over them. And then he went on to say that his girlfriend was not a U.S. citizen, they would lose their jobs if they did anything to them.
Step out of the car.
They have no jurisdiction over you. She is not a United States citizen. They have no jurisdiction.
You are going to get fired from your job, and she's going to get $250,000 for winning in court. Hey, if you want to play, guess what? I'll see you in court.
What is going on here? But anyway, police eventually had to remove her from the car, and when they ran the plates, they discovered they were fake diplomatic tags, which, you know, those are tags that are reserved for foreign government officials. Why are they on their car? I don't know. So, according to reports, Ceci claimed that she was a diplomat and an ambassador at large with immunity from U.S. law. Okay then. The only problem with that is when reporters asked her where she was from, she said she was from the Bronx, New York. So, something's not adding up here.
We asked Mercado about her citizenship status when she bonded out of jail.
I'm a United States national.
Were you born in the Bronx?
I was born in the Bronx, New York.
So are you not, did you denounce your citizenship?
No, I did not. I'm an American state national.
But her boyfriend, who we're talking about here today, waiting outside of the station, told reporters that her immunity was 100% authentic and that the details would come out in a federal lawsuit. But unfortunately, that federal lawsuit never happened. A completely different one happened, which, you know, ended up with this guy in over 2 years in prison. Because about a year after that traffic stop incident, a federal grand jury handed down a sealed indictment against Scott Huss in February of 2025. Here he received 6 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of mail fraud, money laundering, and, you know, thanks to those fake plates, impersonating a foreign diplomat. But to make things even worse, when U.S. Marshals reached out with his warrant for his arrest, hoping that, you know, he would turn himself in voluntarily to not make things worse for himself, yeah, that wasn't gonna happen. Instead, the dude took off to Dallas, Texas, and checked into a hotel under a fake name. What are you doing? But obviously, Marshals then tracked him down any way they could and arrested him there in March of 2025 before extraditing him back to Florida. But now we get to the part that really sets this case apart of anything else. Because once he was finally locked up awaiting his trial, he decided to fire his public defender and decided to represent himself. Just like any other alpha male, I guess. And I guess what followed would be called quite the fascinating use of free will. Because he decided to declare himself as a sovereign citizen and was no longer under the jurisdiction of the United States. Whatever that means, dog. And for anyone unfamiliar of what a sovereign citizen movement is, this is like this unconventional ideology that when people convince themselves that through specific legal language and procedures that they can opt out of being a subject to laws, courts, and the government authority. Now, does that normally work out for them in court? Absolutely not. But that definitely does not stop people from trying anyway. So here, let's see, just to read this is just pretty diabolical. In April of 2025, he submitted a document titled Non-Negotiable Emergency Notice of Equitable Subrogation Expressing My Will and Wishes of Suretyship, Expressing Competency, Counterpetition Motion for Immediate Release, and Motion to Dismiss and Seal with Extreme Prejudice. Okay, buddy. Yeah, that's an actual title. I had to just read that word for word because this is just diabolical. In the document, though, he referred to himself as Scott R. Master. Okay. And he demanded the court to throw out all the charges, seal the case, and release his body immediately. And he also attached some bond for $10 billion issued by some woman in California named Connie Joy Bedwell, who he listed as a private banker. And for context, after looking into her, she was previously arrested in 2018 for fleeing with her child from a supervised visitation facility. So what's going on there? I have no idea. And also in his filings, he also demanded them to release his name, mind, body, and soul without decay. He also asked for the return of all property stolen by agents posing unlawfully as government and warned the court that they were not immune from being charged any amount I deem necessary for damages and injuries to my flesh and blood. Okay, dude, this is wild. Obviously, the courts denied everything, but Scott kept going because over the next few months, he filed motion after motion. Here he had demands secure default, notices of estoppel, writs of habeas corpus, certificates of non-response. I don't know what any of that means, but here we are. Anyway, it was just a constant stream of documents filled with pseudo-legal jargon that meant absolutely nothing. And again, the court struck most of that down because it had no legal basis. So, you know, after months of filing completely unhinged documents claiming claiming the court had no jurisdiction over him, something shifted in June of 2025. Prosecutors sat down with Scott and a standby counsel for about 3 hours to walk through the evidence, and whatever they showed him apparently changed his mind, at least that moment, because on June 23rd, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud. But even after pleading guilty, that didn't stop him from filing sovereign citizen motions. That wasn't coming to an end anytime soon. So I guess the same day after he entered the plea, he also submitted a request for 60 more days to make a lawful and informed decision. And yeah, the decision was apparently made, which doesn't make sense because that was literally the decision he just made when he entered the plea. Okay then. But then the next day, he also filed something called a motion petition for the Great Writ of Divina and abatement of exoneration, invoking some religious language and declaring himself a divine heir and ambassador of Christ. What the... And also in another document, he announced that he would not be appearing as a summoned dead entity corpse because he is living and divine. Whatever that means again. Like, all of this is just completely insane. Honestly, that public defender was probably lucky he got fired because that would be a wild case to handle. And I guess by September, he seemed to have fully disassociated from his own entity, filing papers claiming that Scott Lee Huss was merely a debtor and transmitting utility, and that he personally was operating in some kind of private equity jurisdiction. I mean, this whole story just gets more confusing as time progresses. But on September 11th, 2025, a federal judge sentenced Scott Lee Huss to 27 months in prison, which honestly kind of sounds light for everything he did. But he was also ordered to pay back $609,000 in restitution and will face 3 years of supervised release once he gets out. And the U.S. Attorney's Office put out a statement noting that government relief programs were designed to help struggling businesses and their families, not to fund luxury lifestyles, and that those who exploited these programs for their personal gain stole from the American people, which they did. His Instagram account, the main one with 3.2 million followers, hasn't been updated since February, about 2 weeks before the indictment came down, but all of his posts are still up as of the recording of this video, which is pretty ironic because, you know, all of them are portraying clearly a very false image. But when it comes to the sovereign citizen thing, I don't think this is the first time I've seen this happen. I think, wasn't it 42 Doug or something like that, the rapper? I'm pretty sure he also declared himself a sovereign citizen when he was arrested a few years ago. I feel like that also happened like during the pandemic. But hey, regardless, after all of those filings, Scott in the end did plead guilty, and now he's currently serving his time in federal prison. So I guess this is just yet another reminder that what you see on Instagram isn't always reality, because often they could literally be committing fraud to uphold that lifestyle. But other than that, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.